Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. We're doing really good this morning. It's my distinct pleasure. My name is David Wall Rice. I'm chair of the Department of Psychology, also assistant provost here at Morehouse College, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, this morning. The Honorable James Clapper is actually here as the result of tremendous efforts by Charles Carithers, who's a 2005 graduate of Morehouse College. I'm going to ask, they'll be in conversation today. I'm going to ask him to come up and give a couple of words, but I do want to say this. Because of kind of the social climate that we're in, because of how it is that we consider and understand the conditions and the experiences of black folk today, it's really encouraging to be able to be in conversation with Charles about the Director of National Intelligence and his commitment to diversifying the intelligence field. One of the things that I said early in the week, this week, was I was like, Charles, does he really want to come? Because we want to ask some questions, right? We want to talk about COINTELPRO. We want to talk about, what's going on with Trump and Russia and what's happening with these emails and Hillary Clinton and all that kind of stuff. Are we sure that maybe we can just do a job fair or something like that? And so Mr. Carithers said, no doubt. We're going to make sure that he gives us some appropriate words, and then we're open. This is my alma mater, and certainly we'd expect nothing less from Morehouse College. And as an aside, we got communications from Jay Johnson this morning, of course, Director of Homeland Security, and he was excited that the Honorable James Clapper was going to be here today. So we have a lot of excitement around him being here on this morning. So without further ado, I'll ask Charles to come up now and do a more formal welcome.
Thank you, David. Good morning, Morehouse College. I'm Charles Carithers with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, 2005 graduate, sociology major from Boston, Massachusetts. To say it is a pleasure to return to the halls of Morehouse College and address you all here today is an understatement. President Wilson, we thank you for your invitation. We're here today for a conversation with one of our nation's most senior national security advisors, the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. James Clapper. Jim Clapper started his service to our nation in 1961 as an enlisted Marine infantryman. He rose through the ranks and 6 years ago became the President's most senior intelligence advisor, while also integrating and leading the 17 agencies and components of the United States intelligence community, which includes CIA, NSA, the intel services of the federal departments, and all of our military services. He is the fourth person to hold the position of DNI and has served in such capacity for 6 years, more than the first three DNIs combined. So I've learned a lot about leadership in difficult situations and about saying difficult things that need to be said, speaking truth to power, from watching Jim Clapper. And that's something my Morehouse education has taught me a lot about too. It was Morehouse College that gave me the foundation on how to look at the myriad of the world's problems, how to argue my points of view, no matter the setting or contrarian the disposition. I still recall the day when my mentor, Dr. Michael Hodge, sat me down in his office my freshman year, some 15 years ago, and he asked me one question: how would I impact this world? That is something no one has ever thought to ask me. That is something I never once contemplated. On my desk in my office sits a framed quote from our dear Morehouse brother, Dr. Howard Thurman. Over the heads of her students, Morehouse holds a crown that she challenges them to grow tall enough to wear. While I have not met many of you personally, I know what you're all capable of because you're men of Morehouse. Morehouse College, please join me in welcoming our beloved institution, the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Jim Clapper.
Thanks, sir. That was great. Thank you. Black Lives Matter. Let's start with that simple, positive assertion. Black Lives Matter. I cannot, in 2016, come to Morehouse College, one of the most respected historically black colleges in the nation, Dr. King's alma mater, and a school that is so active in the Black Lives Matter movement that you dedicated all of your Crown forums this year to it, and not make that clear. So I want to thank Dr. Williams for inviting me so that I can say here today, Black Lives Matter. It bothers me that declaring a simple truth is somehow so controversial. I mean, I get it, I understand why it's controversial. People hear the positive assertion that Black Lives Matter, and they somehow assume there's a negative connotation associated with it. They seem to hear, if Black lives matter, then other lives don't matter as much, when that's not what that phrase means at all, at least not to me. So whether we agree with every tenet of the movement or not, and noting that I'm not here to talk about the movement, and that it's illegal for any government official, which includes me for another 77 days, but who's counting, to endorse any movement. It's important for leaders to assert the fact that Black lives matter, because our nation has a long history of Black lives not mattering to many people, or at least not mattering as much as other lives. Ms. Obama, Michelle Obama, our superb First Lady, has said a number of times that when she sees her daughters in the White House, she remembers that she and they live in a house that was built in part by slaves. And because the first family is a family of color, we are visually confronted with the fact that Black lives matter more in our nation now, certainly than they did the last decade of the 18th century, when the White House was under construction. Well, a lot of people say that's just ancient American history. But in our lifetimes too, to many people, Black lives have mattered less than other lives. I remember that the first time that distinction came into focus for me. My dad was an Army signals intelligence officer in the Second World War. And what he was involved in was intercepting and deriving intelligence from German and Japanese communications. And after the war, he decided to make the Army a career. And the result of traveling the globe with him, I kind of grew up on intelligence sites and operations around the world. And some of my earliest memories are living in Eritrea and on the Horn of Africa in 1946, and in Japan during the Korean War. I was about 11 years old when my family lived at a place called Shitoshi, which is on the island of Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island of Japan. Now, this is about 4 years after President Harry Truman signed the executive order that desegregated the military. Now, that may have been done institutionally, but it certainly wasn't socially. Now, a lot of the social life on military bases, particularly overseas, and certainly that was the case of the base where my dad was stationed, where we lived, would center around Sunday brunches at the officers' club. And so the club would put out their best linen and china, and they always had a Japanese band who did a great job at impersonating American music. And of course, the officers wore their uniforms, who of course included my dad, who was then a captain, which is a fairly junior officer in the military. And then the wives wore their best dresses, complete with, and you never see this today, white gloves. Everyone dressed up even us kids. So basically for me, it was torture. Now, as a kid, I didn't know all the senior officers in the club. I didn't know quite who the colonels and lieutenant colonels were. But one Sunday, we went to brunch, and I recognized my dentist. He was an Army first lieutenant and a junior officer, much like my dad. Now, that particular Sunday, when he came to brunch at the officers' club, my family had a prime table near the band. But because he was black, my dentist sat by himself on the perimeter of the room. So when the music stopped, my mom, and I think she did this deliberately, did it on purpose. She stood up, a few people looked at her, and she rather ostentatiously walked over to the dentist's table. And of course, by this time, and this is all, essentially a white-dominated thing, the whole room was looking at her. She talked with him for a minute or two, and then invited him to sit with us, took him by the hand, and just as ostentatiously brought him to our table. And as they walked to the table, all the colonels and lieutenant colonels, the senior officers, stopped looking at her and started staring at my dad with that unspoken look of, can't you get your wife under control? I'll never forget my dad's expression. It's one of a mixture of amusement, admiration, and fear. But to his great credit, he made my sister and me move over to make room at our table for the dentist. Now, there may have been, in the day, consequences for my parents, although if there were, they never mentioned them to me. In fact, my mother never said a word, even after we got home, about what she'd done. And she certainly talked to me about a lot of other things, and it's probably why I remember this so vividly, even though it took place 64 years ago. So at a very impressionable age, my mother showed me that black lives matter just as much as any other lives. And of course, that was not a commonly held belief at the time. Now, around the same age, my experiences with my dad got me interested in intelligence profession. So after we left Japan, in 1953, we were moving on to our next duty station in Massachusetts. So as military families typically do, they park the kids with the grandparents while they find a new place to live. So my grandparents, my mother's parents at the time, lived in Philadelphia. I was about 12 years old. And it's always great being with the grandparents because they'd let me stay up as late as I wanted, watch TV. It was cool. So one of my favorite things to do on a Friday night was to watch what was called the Schmidt's Beer Mystery Hour. And they showed these old black and white Charlie Chan movies. I used to love them. So the movie would end about 10:30, and I did what the equivalent of surfing. Now, in the day, you got to understand it. In those days, you had to actually walk up to the TV and turn the dial to change channels. You didn't have any of these remote things. So I walked up to the TV, and I'm turning the dial, and there's only like 4 channels in those days. And I got between channel 4 and 5, never forget this, and I could hear people talking. Gee, what is that? There's no picture, just people talking. So I listened for a while, 10, 15 minutes, and I figured out it was the Philadelphia Police Department dispatcher. And this is kind of interesting, so I'm going to listen to this some more. So I went out to the kitchen and got some toothpicks and stuck them in the dial so it would stay there. I guess I hacked my grandparents' black and white TV set. So I started listening, and it was very interesting, and it just intrigued me in figuring out what was going on. So next night, I did the same thing, stayed up. I got a map of the city of Philadelphia, and so I started plotting on the map where the police calls where the cruisers, police cruisers, were dispatched to. And I kept listening and listening, and pretty soon I figured out what all the 10 codes were, you know, the 10-4, 10-5, and all those, because over time you could figure them out. Then I figured out all the call signs, you know, in other words, the personal identifiers that all the detectives had. And then I figured out, just by plotting the calls on the map, what the police district boundaries were. So I built myself some card files. It's what we call metadata today. I didn't know that then. And so I did this for, pretty soon I'm sleeping all day and staying up all night listening to police calls, figuring and building my card file and all this sort of thing. So pretty soon, about 6 weeks later, my folks had a place to live in Massachusetts. They came back to Philadelphia to retrieve my sister and me. So my dad says, well, what have you been doing? So I whip out my map and whip out my card files. And I'll never forget the expression on my dad's face. My God, I raised my own replacement. So I tell the story, you know, it's humorous, I hope, but it also is an illustration, I think, a classified one, of what intelligence work can be about. It involves research, determination, persistence, patience, continuity, drawing inferences when you don't have complete information. And of course, in this case, taking advantage of what you hear. And of course, I wasn't obviously an intended listener for what they were doing. Well, that little avocation 62 years ago, when I was a 12-year-old kid, started me down the path to service in the intelligence business. And I actually began my career in 1963 when I was commissioned from the ROTC program at the University of Maryland as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And after that, I spent a couple tours in my war, which was Southeast Asia. But I certainly had no idea I was going to stick around for 54 years. And I would have never dreamed in my wildest imagination that I'd close my intelligence career in a job which gives me the privilege of briefing the President of the United States. And in 1963, there was simply no way you could have told me that I'd spend 6 years plus briefing our nation's first African-American president. That's something my father and mother would have been astounded by, and I think pretty proud. Now, looking back over my more than half a century in the intelligence profession, one of the compelling questions I get asked is why? As in, why do we do intelligence, and why would I do it for so long? Particularly over the past few years, which hadn't exactly been a cakewalk. As the American public has held very, very public and very critical discussions on how we do intelligence in this country. And I've spent some time and given some thought on the question of why do we, or for that matter, any nation state, do intelligence, and why I've stuck around. I believe at its most basic level, we conduct intelligence to help reduce uncertainty for our national security decision makers, starting, of course, with intelligence custom number one, the President. Now, we can't eliminate uncertainty for him or any decision maker, but we can provide insight and analysis to help their understanding and to make uncertainty at least manageable, so that our national security decision makers can make educated decisions with an understanding of the risk involved, and so that we and our friends and allies operate on a shared understanding of the facts and the situation. That's why we briefed each of the presidential and vice presidential candidates this summer and fall, to help reduce uncertainty for our next president, so that when he or she steps into the Oval Office, he or she will have as good an understanding of our complex and uncertain world as we can provide them. Now, the world's obviously changed a lot since I was hacking an analog TV set back in 1953. Today, because of the internet, it's a whole lot easier for 12-year-old kids to find entertainment. And of course, the internet has also profoundly changed both the challenges and the opportunities that we encounter when we're doing our intelligence work. There is a global onrush of technology that's increasingly hard to adapt to. Technical areas like artificial intelligence, healthcare, agriculture, self-driving cars, 3D printing, genetic engineering, all have the potential to revolutionize our lives for the better. Or they could present great vulnerabilities that are very hard to predict. And the world's getting exponentially more complicated as even mundane technologies are attaching themselves to the internet. My national counterintelligence executive recently told me about a problem our security folks came across. During a standard sweep of a new intelligence building before we moved in, they discovered several wireless signals transmitting out into the world. Now, for a security type, this makes you very nervous because you're thinking this is some foreign power who's already planted a transmitter that's sending out messages. So the security folks located the sources and were relieved to discover the signals were not from foreign intelligence bugs placed in the facility. They came from vending machines trying to tell their distributor they were empty. And apparently vending machines phoning home for refills is a fairly common phenomenon, which we came to know, and look, now we don't get all excited about it. Well, that's just an example of the Internet of Things that we keep talking and hearing about, which right now has more than 10.3 billion endpoints, which is projected to grow to almost 30 billion by 2020, and that will entail a market of about $1.7 trillion. And we're headed for a reality in which even our clothes will be connected. And when doctors regularly prescribe wireless monitors for health conditions, even now I need a security waiver for my hearing aids, which have Bluetooth connectivity. By the way, I don't turn on the Bluetooth. I got enough information coming in without that. So I believe that the intersection of the cyber threat with the Internet of Things will become a very, very complicated thing. We saw that just a couple of weeks ago when someone made use of the Internet of Things to launch a massive denial of service attack here in the United States. As a global trend, this onrush of technology, if I can call it that, is driving both threats and opportunities for the intelligence community. So we as a nation need to move past just defending ourselves from drink machines and hearing aids. And I think the second major global trend that complicates our lives is that we're now living in a world of what I call unpredictable instability, in which right now, 2/3 of the nations around the world are in some risk of instability in the next few years. Nearly everywhere, the intelligence community can point out the potential for failures or collapses of governments. But we can't anticipate the specifics, the where, when, and how for our policymakers. But that's why we characterize it as so unpredictable. And in the coming decades, an underlying meta driver of unpredictable instability will be climate change. In fact, it already is. Major population centers will compete for ever diminishing supplies of food, water, energy, and other commodities. And governments will have an increasingly difficult time controlling their territories. Because of all these factors, after ISIL is gone, we can expect some other terrorist entity to rise in a cycle of extremism, which will continue to confront us for the foreseeable future. So unpredictable instability has been a constant for our current administration. It will be for the next one, and probably the next one after that. Doesn't matter who the president is. And by the way, our more traditional adversaries and competitors, Russia and China, Iran, North Korea, will also continue to challenge us. So I think it makes a lot of people nervous that with an election cycle that's, shall I say, been sportier than we're used to, we'll elect a new president with the new national security leaders and drop them into this situation. Election day, thank God, is now just 4 days away. So hopefully we'll wake up in 5 days and knowing who our next president will be. And when I say we, I don't mean just we in the United States. I mean the whole world. In my travels overseas this year, I've been taken aback by the intense interest in this political campaign in this country. People everywhere hang on every word of the candidates. And by the way, some try to do a lot more than just listen. Just a few weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary and I released a joint statement saying that the recent high-profile compromises of emails were directed at the highest levels of the Russian government. Our adversaries going after U.S. political organizations is a new, aggressive spin on the political cycle, and something that certainly makes our work much more difficult, much more demanding. And by the way, as already mentioned, that Homeland Security Secretary is Morehouse man Jay Johnson. Yes, absolutely. Jay and I served together in the Pentagon when I was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and he was the General Counsel for the Department of Defense, and we continue that close association and friendship now in our current capacities. And so happens that Jay and I were in the White House Situation Room last night for a meeting, and that's when I let him know that I was coming here. And I think the world and all, Jay, and we as a nation are blessed to have him in this very difficult, demanding position. Now, I know a lot of people have been feeling uncertainty about what will happen with this presidential transition. There's been a lot of, if I can coin the word, catastrophizing in the 24-hour news cycle and on social media. So I'm here with a message that I've been repeating in public forums for the past few months. It'll be okay. Our nation has a legacy of orderly transition of power, going back to George Washington's retiring in 1797, and when he turned the presidency over to John Adams. I remember it well. And because of our mission and our professionalism, in contrast, any uncertainty surrounding the election and transition to the next administration, one constant in national security is the people of the intelligence community. I consider today's intelligence community a pillar of stability during this transition. And if I had to answer why I stuck around the IC for more than half a century, it's because of our challenging and important mission. That we're facing the most diverse array of threats I've seen in my 53 years in this business. And it's our mission, the U.S. intelligence community's job, to reduce uncertainty for our national security decision makers. And I also say I stuck around because of the magnificent women and men of the intelligence community around the world who get up every morning and go to work on that mission. So that's the wind-up. Here's the pitch. That work depends on clear and sober analysis, as free of bias as we can get, which means we need to look at the intelligence we collect from a variety of viewpoints that eliminates biases that skew our analysis. that notes and, in fact, encourages dissent, disagreements among the intelligence agencies and analysts, and also point out the things that we don't know. And I can say from experience that it's hard to get a diversity of ideas from a room full of old, white, straight, cisgender men who all look like me and who have similar life experiences. That's why diversity in the intelligence community has been a priority of mine for decades. Because beyond being the right thing to do, improving diversity is critical to our mission, along with making sure that minority employees have a seat at the table and that their voice is heard. That's one reason why I was very happy in April of 2014 when Frank Taylor took over as head of the intelligence element within Department of Homeland Security. Frank also is an old friend from Air Force days and is African American, and he is absolutely superb as an intelligence senior leader. And of course, he works for the aforementioned Jay Johnson. And I was elated in January of 2015 when Lieutenant General Vince Stewart was sworn in as the first black director of a major intelligence agency at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Long overdue. I'm especially proud of Vince because he's a Marine. He's also the first Marine general to ever head one of the agencies. We certainly haven't reached nirvana with diversity and inclusion in the intelligence community. In fact, this summer we publicly acknowledged that fact. In the past, we've classified intelligence community demographic reports, ostensibly because a foreign adversary could count up the numbers and somehow know more about our capabilities and extrapolate intelligence from that. But this spring we put together an unclassified report and released it for the first time ever to the public. And it's not pretty. And we've drawn some scrutiny because of that. And we should draw scrutiny. We have a mission that depends on diverse thoughts and ways of thinking. And yet we lag behind the corporate world and the rest of government and certainly the public when it comes to hiring and promoting both black and Hispanic women and men. Now, that's on public record. That public report is going to put pressure on future leaders who succeed me and the rest of the intelligence community to make things better because we will be held publicly accountable. That's another reason why I believe the intelligence community has to protect our sources and methods and then be transparent about the things that we can talk about. We in the intelligence community dedicate our lives to analyzing the world and speaking hard truths to power. That means we better be able to face hard truths about ourselves, like the ones in this report. And that means we'd better be able to see our own biases, which is why I've made unconscious bias training mandatory for all senior intelligence officers in the community. I don't fully understand why our IC diversity lags so far behind the corporate world, although I suspect it has something to do with that phrase I opened with 20 minutes ago. Black Lives Matter. If you feel, as a community, that you have to defend the fact that your lives matter, then I can understand not wanting to participate in the institutions that you feel do not necessarily value your lives, particularly ones known for keeping secrets, which of course we are. And before this spring, we wouldn't even say how many minorities that we employed. Well, sometimes it's good to be king. We ended that. And our transparency on this topic allows me to come to Morehouse today to recognize our shortcomings publicly and to say, your experiences do matter. and they will make you a better, more effective intelligence officer. Your education here matters. Your knowledge and your ideas matter. Black lives matter, and we need you. I sincerely hope there are people in this room who will join, or at least consider seriously joining the intelligence community. And if intelligence work isn't your cup of tea, please consider service elsewhere in the government. We need smart and educated young people throughout our government, especially now. And service is so much better than quick money or a life of leisure. Many of you already know that, or you wouldn't, I don't think you'd be here this morning. Intelligence work, I consider a noble profession with a mission that's critical to the safety and security of our nation and its citizens. And for those who are thinking about joining us, I'll tell you what my principal deputy, my superb deputy, Stephanie O'Sullivan, what her first boss at CIA told her about intelligence. You'll never be bored. You'll experience every other human emotion, but you'll never, ever be bored. So, thanks for listening to the geezer ramble on for the past 20 minutes or so. And I'd like to do something a little different, and that is I'd like to invite the Morehouse man, Charles, who introduced me back up here. And normally when I visit colleges and universities, I like to bring a recent grad along with me who is now a member of the intelligence community, and of course that's certainly Charles's case. And to get a younger perspective, of course, for me, everybody's younger, about what it's like to be a young person in today's intelligence community workforce. Because my experience is well dated. So for today, I didn't have to look too far. Charles, of course, a class of 2005 from Morehouse, works in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as now the public affairs leader of our intelligence community research activity. Very interesting outfit that he's associated with, what we call IARPA, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is actually a pretty heady position for a relatively young officer. But I just think Charles is a great illustration of where you can go and what you can do in the intelligence community with a Morehouse education. So Charles, I guess I'll join you over there. I think we'll do it that way. I get to sit down. Anyway, thanks very much. What do you think?
Great. Can everyone hear me okay? Is my mic on? Great. So Morehouse College, we're opening questions for Director Clapper. We only ask if you could just head to the microphone here to probably to your right so everyone can hear. And if you don't mind, I'll ask the first question, Director Clapper. Morehouse College has a rich history of culture, of being at the forefront of social movements. I think back to the civil rights movement in our country, apartheid in South Africa, and more contemporary Black Lives Matter. If a student here is a member of Black Lives Matter or involved with the movement, will they have any issues obtaining a security clearance?
No, that shouldn't have any impact at all. I mean, it's a specific case in point, but it illustrates the principle that's used when you're cleared for access into the intelligence community. And of course, the whole point is assessing trustworthiness to protect classified information. And we have very strict rules on how judgments are made about people and their character. And the approach is the whole person concept. So we try to look at the person's whole life and to gauge their ultimate character. So certainly participation in this movement or any other similar movement, as long as you're not trying to overthrow the government, is not grounds for not getting a clearance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to Morehouse. This is really quite exceptional in the sense that we haven't had someone at your level to come to our institution and really with a message that's very powerful to recruit minority people to be in the intelligence community, which is very important. I probably won't have another chance, so I'm going to ask you two questions this morning. Recently, the President of the United States issued a presidential directive regarding diversity in the national security agencies. Yet, reading that directive, it didn't seem to have a lot of teeth in it in terms of what is the President and the administration trying to do in terms of recruiting minorities to be a part of the National Security Agency. Normally, if you're going to have impact, you usually set up some type of program for special minority recruitment. Some people think the era of affirmative action is over. I don't believe that. And if you look at the national security agencies, you see the lack of representation in them says we got a lot more to do in that regard. So I would like to listen to what the administration plans to do with this new directive and what will be the impact in terms of a new administration. That's question number one. Question number two involves this whole question with all the technology available in the world. People used to say the best intelligence is human intelligence. And the question is, looking at all the technological innovations in the intelligence community, does this human intelligence really still have a role, and how important is it?
Well, two good questions. First, on the first one, the memorandum that, the document that the President signed, I think, was a clear manifesto to what the national security apparatus, and by that is the intelligence community, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice is normally and Department of Treasury, are those organizations that are considered part of that community. And I think there's a clear recognition that minorities and women are underrepresented generally. In our case, it reinforced programs and initiatives that we have underway. I guess, you know, it might have had maybe more impact to have done it at the beginning of the administration, 2009 or so, rather than near the end. But I think the message and the intent is very clear. This is something that certainly will carry over into the next administration. And certainly that's a charge that the intelligence community will take on, regardless of who's in my position. We've had clearly a historical challenge since the very origins of the intelligence community, going back to World War II, heavily dominated by white males. And that is a legacy that takes time to change. I'm very proud of the fact that I had a lot to do with the fact that our first two women directors of one of the major agencies. I had a lot to do with putting them in that position. I'm very, very proud of Vince Stewart as the first African-American director of a major agency. Those are all great role models that we need to expand upon. The problem we have in the intelligence community kind of boils down somewhat to numbers. Every year, the Congress appropriates a finite number of people that we are authorized to have in the intelligence community, which includes both civilians and military. At the same time, our attrition has run very low. So we have a lot of people who stay on in the intelligence community because they love the work, they're dedicated to it, beyond the time they could retire. And so we have a very relatively narrow window of people to affect change. And the history statistically, because I've followed this pretty close over the last 25 years, is we make steady but very small incremental improvements. And I suspect that will continue. But we're a ways, certainly statistically, and even if you look underneath the bald statistics, certainly who occupies the senior positions. What the president's directive basically did, in my mind, was to highlight that. And of course, these memos don't just appear out of nowhere. They are preceded by a series of meetings, and in my case, chaired by no less than Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, African American, who is, believe me, powerful and someone who can be pretty intimidating. So we take it seriously in the intelligence community. This is not something that's going to be fixed by close of business next Friday. Just to be honest. What was the other question? I forgot.
Does human intel still have
human
valuable-
intelligence. Yeah, I'm old. I need help. Human intelligence remains very, very important. And what we're just to put this in context, what we're talking about, the various classical forms of intelligence. Signal intelligence, which is what my dad did in World War II, which continues yet today, but in much different forms than in the day. Is what we call geospatial intelligence, which has to do with imagery, mapping, charting, geodesy, and both of which are technical forms of collection. And then there's the classic, James Bond kind of stuff, human intelligence, where you're actually attempting to recruit from people and elicit information from them. It's still important. We still make a big investment in human intelligence, but it has become ever more challenging because of the digital era that we're in. And it's getting increasingly difficult for human intelligence agents, case officers as we call them, to mask their identities because of the digital signatures that people generate and sustain through their lives. And so that is a real challenge for us. But we have to change the manner in which we conduct human intelligence, but as a discipline, it's as important as it ever has been.
Hello, my name is Alexander Barron. I'm an international studies Chinese double major from Atlanta, Georgia. And so my question is regarding China. And so my question for you is, when considering intelligence, how likely do you all think conflict, between countries will occur, specifically in the South China Sea? And what metrics do you use to inform the president of how likely conflict is and who the actors are in these conflicts, who's spurring the conflict?
It's a great question, very current. Chinese are very, very committed to extending their national sovereignty over the South China Sea. And they've drawn the boundary that they claim, called the 9-dash line, which was subjected to an international tribunal hearing, which ruled against the Chinese. This appeal to the International Tribunal was lodged by the Philippines. The decision was privately supported by virtually all the countries in the region, but all of them were a little reluctant to say anything about it publicly. So we do track what the Chinese are doing in the South China Sea through a variety of sources, which I won't go into here, but certainly one of them, because you can see evidence of this because of the availability of commercial imagery, is tracking what the Chinese are doing in terms of construction, or dredging and construction in these islets and reefs. And so we do keep the president up to speed on these developments. and this is particularly crucial if he's going to have an interchange or dialogue with his Chinese opposite number. And obviously, there is a balancing act here between preserving what we're interested in, which of course is freedom of navigation, either air or maritime, but at the same time, trying to keep the lid on things and prevent a conflict, some incident occurring in the South China Sea that could grow into a conflagration. And of course, the president, appropriately and understandably so, very concerned about this. So we do make every attempt to keep him current and posted on activities in general in the South China Sea.
Mr. Clapper, thank you for coming. My name is Samuel Livingston. I'm the Director for African American Studies here at Morehouse College. I teach a class on the global Black Lives Matter movement currently, so I appreciated your statement at the beginning of your speech. But I'm concerned by the fact that recently the Color Change, two organizations, Color Change and the Center for Constitutional Rights, they filed an appeal or an investigation about investigations of the movement for Black Lives Matter. And it appears that there is a hyper degree of surveillance and disruption going on around some of those movements. Could you please speak to why is that the case? And if you say that Black Lives Matter, how can we actually have that in place? And then I had a second question. I could save the second question if you wanted me to.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't aware of this. This is a court case?
Yes, an investigation.
I wasn't aware of that, so I really can't comment on it. I'm not sure what. I haven't read it. I don't know what the rationale is. I'm sorry, I can't comment.
If it is the case that there are some efforts by the they mentioned in particular FBI and Homeland Security that they were engaging in disruptive activities against these activists. If that's the case, what would be your response?
Well, I can't comment because I don't know the facts and circumstances here. This is the first I've heard of it. I'd want to understand if there was a written document. I'd want to understand the rationale for it.
I'll share it with you. I'm sure your our workers will actually do that as well. The second question, briefly, is about U.S. intelligence in Africa. And, we have a very negative history of supporting dictators, especially in Congo, today Democratic Republic of Congo. So I work with an organization, and we talk about the impact of the United States intelligence in Congo, especially not necessarily just human intelligence, but operations. Could you speak to today's policy? How do you see, what type of change would you try to institute in the remaining 77 days that you have, or recommend for your successor in terms of African foreign policy? Hillary Clinton talked about the need for a Russian reset button. Do you see a need for an African reset button in terms of United States foreign policy and involvement in the intelligence community?
Question prompts me to explain a very important principle that we in the intelligence community try to adhere to, in that we try to tee up the information for policymakers to make decisions, but we don't engage in the policy itself. So it would be inappropriate for me to comment on what the next president should do in terms of any policy initiative. I will say that our intelligence resources in Africa are very thin. We try to stay abreast of developments there, again, to keep our policymakers informed on whatever they want to do. I'll also tell you there are very strict rules on, as a result of some abuses in our history, on how intelligence can be used and whether or not it can be shared with a government, because a major feature of of this are human rights considerations. That wasn't always the case in our ancient history, but it is now.
Good morning. Thank you for coming to speak with us. It was greatly appreciated. My name is Sean Shepard. I'm a graduating senior finance and Spanish major here at the college. And you spoke about growing up around the world in Japan and North Africa. And here at Morehouse, we have a vision of creating a global house. So my question is, how can we learn more about our cultural allies and neighbors in order to improve relations and communication between our people?
Well, again, that's to the extent that intelligence can enlighten people, our challenge is always going to be if we've acquired the information through sensitive sources and methods, we generally have to protect that. So it's in some ways hard for us to participate as part of a public discourse, a public interchange with other countries, other regions, other cultures. So what we try to do is educate those who are actually responsible for it. So that means we make a lot of effort to support our State Department, our diplomats who are posted in these countries, so they can engage in these dialogues. But we kind of have to stay backstage, if you will. So indirectly, I guess, to answer your question, we do help promote that by arming, educating, enlightening those who are our interfaces with foreign governments and foreign peoples.
Thank you.
Let me interject quickly. I want to make sure everybody's able to stay on time. If you can make the questions as quick as possible, we'll have these last two, and then we'll make sure that we get out of here as quickly as we can, okay? Thank you. Excuse me.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I learned that the role of the GNI is to reduce uncertainty. So it is a risk management problem that you face and you try to solve, reduce uncertainty. I have a general question. Intelligence can have the character of a political commodity, information. How does the office of the GNI balance between the interest of the people and the objective of the leader? How do you balance between that?
I didn't understand the question.
Balance the objectivity of the intelligence and with the intent of the leaders,
What?
with the intent of the leadership.
Well, that's the question here is a very good one because this is again a fundamental premise, a fundamental tenet of intelligence is conveying our best judgment, our best assessment based on what we know, which is never 100% knowledge, to our leadership, to our policymakers. And the policy, the decision maker can either be intelligence customer number one in the Oval Foxhole or on the Oval Office, or a soldier in the Oval Foxhole, if I can stretch the metaphor. And in all cases, we try to be as accurate and relevant as we possibly can be, and not allow that to be colored or tainted or shaded by what we believe is what they want to hear, which may not be congruent with what the message that we have to impart. And over my career, I've been in some difficult conversations with people, either in the military, when I served in the military, or since then, where what I had to impart didn't quite comport with what they wanted to hear, because it represented perhaps in their mind a failure of their policy or their military operation. But that's something we must do in intelligence, because if you don't, I think that fundamentally compromises what we're trying to do.
Hello, my name is Duran Marble. I'm a junior philosophy and music double major here. And my question is that, given that Russia's foreign policy has always been driven by finding a warm water port, and given recent actions in former Soviet states, how is the U.S. intelligence community keeping the president informed on Russian activity in Ukraine and the Arctic Sea?
Excellent question, and this actually bears somewhat on my brief comments about climate change. Of course, what's happening is that the ice pack, the ice flow in the Arctic is reducing, and so the available time of access in the Arctic is growing, particularly for ships. So the Russians have paid attention to this. The Arctic is a very strategic zone for them, and they have embarked on a very, although of late it's kind of slowed down because of economic challenges, but their intent is to either refurbish or build new bases along the Arctic and new ports. And of course, they would like to extend the continental shelf out because of their belief in the energy resources that would be potentially available to them. So increasingly, the Arctic has become a more strategic area of concern, particularly for the countries that border it, particularly Canada, Norway, and others. We are part of a Arctic Council that with the other countries, and we are involved in intelligence sharing with our friends who are on that council. And the Chinese have also gotten more aggressive about their presence in the Arctic, which is kind of irony, I think, after their exorbitant claims about their sovereignty over the South China Sea. So you're quite right. From a strategic perspective, this has always been a concern of Great Russia, or the Soviet Union when it existed, is access to warm water ports. And of course, the global warming, and the warming of the Arctic region is a tremendous opportunity in their minds for them.
Morehouse College, please join me in thanking Director James Clapper for his presentation today.
Thanks for being here. Thank you.